Hello and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host Eric Tait.
And I'm Bob Anthony. Good to see you, Eric.
Good to see you again. I know you're suffering a little bit under the weather, but hopefully we'll get through this without too much.
I think I'll make it. I hope so.
Thanks to Manhattan Neighborhood Network and EBT Educational Productions. Once again, we'll try to bring you some updates on what's going on here, locally, nationally, and around the globe. Bob, you got some updates for us on recent breaking media.
Yes, a couple of items are breaking as we tape this the Wednesday before you see this on MNN. And I guess I'll start with the New York Times. And the editor, the top editor, was with us at last night's New York Association of Black Journalists Awards dinner. You and I sat together and we listened to the Dean speak.
Dean Baquet.
Dean Baquet.
Yeah.
And he spoke about what changes he envisioned for the Times and the fact that he, of course, believes that diversity will play a major part in what the Times does in the future. But this morning I woke up to the news that he had to announce to the staff that he's making 100 layoffs.
Or
buyouts, correct.
Right.
He'll have to somehow eliminate 100 jobs from the newsroom. Either he's hoping through buyouts alone, but if not buyouts, he makes it clear there will be layoffs to reach that number.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that actually transpires, because normally, as we know from the history of our business, when it's time to downsize, most of the people of color tend to go first and soonest.
Unfortunately, that has been the case with a number of the local newspapers, the tabloids included, in the recent...
As a matter of fact, one of our longtime colleagues who received the Lifetime Achievement Award at that same NYBJ Awards banquet and dinner, Clem Richardson, was a longtime employee of the New York Daily News, and of course in their recent rash of downsizing. Clem, veteran columnist, phenomenal reporter, man of great breadth and depth, disappeared from their staff. So it's not uncommon when these downsizes happen to see a lot of our veteran people go early and go fast.
And it's not like he didn't have a good relationship with the readers. He had a strong following between his columns and his breaking news reporting. So he was obviously an asset to the Daily News.
Had been for years.
Right,
so,
and well known in the community. So it was good to speak to him yesterday.
I went to that dinner just because Clem was getting that award. He's been on Media Watch more than once.
That's true.
And that's because we go to veterans who can put this media and this medium in perspective for us and for our viewers. So yeah, it was good that Dana Tyler was recognized for 25 years of being in this market, in the #1 market, and still a stalwart anchor at Channel 2. So yeah, it was a great dinner. I'm glad we were there, Bob.
I'm glad we were there too. And in addition to hear the nice retrospective they did on John Noel, formerly of Channel 4,
yes.
Who passed way too soon last year.
John Slattery.
John Slattery as well.
Yeah.
They both left us, and Slattery much more recently. Yeah. But the retrospective that David Ushery did on Mr. Noel was just impressive.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you that was a phenomenal tribute. I've been in this business, I've told you many times, for 45 plus years. And David Ushery paid a phenomenal tribute to John Noel. I told him, David, make sure you save that piece of tape or whatever media you put it on, because that will be a phenomenal thing for you in the future, for the Noel family, and for young journalists who need to see what real good
journalism is
all about.
Yes.
Even when it takes on a personal nature, it is still outstanding journalism. So hats off to David. Glad to say he's one of our longtime colleagues.
And unfortunately, we have to segue to a little bit of, we celebrated the best in journalism last night.
Now we can go to the worst.
Yes, now we can go to the other end of the spectrum and talk about some of the the lousier forms of alleged journalism.
Other updates for you on stories we have covered in the past. Go shoot, Bob.
And as we have reported here, and has been reported widely elsewhere, if you remember, the New York Post ran a photo of two men wearing knapsacks shortly after the bombings in Boston.
The Boston Marathon bombings.
Boston Marathon bombings. Mm-hmm. And the Post ran a headline that said bagmen, and said that the FBI and authorities were looking to question the two men photographed on the front page of the New York Post. And, of course, as we know...
At the time, as we said,
yes,
that was not the best example of journalism that could have been put out. And we predicted, what was our prediction, Bob?
We said that somebody's going to get sued.
We predicted somebody would get sued. Lo and behold, the New York Post got sued. And the upshot, Bob, did they give any particulars of the out-of-court settlement?
They did not. I mean, they did reach an out-of-court settlement. Both sides refused to discuss the cost or the elements of the settlement.
What the payoff was.
Right. But we called them out at that moment for the extremely poor editorial judgment in running a photo that could not have been vetted in any way.
Seriously bad journalism, folks, which we called at the time.
Yes. And
our prediction, of course, came true. So, but in other updates, I guess, the other story that will still be breaking because, as we all know, the first case of Ebola popped up in the United States.
Correct.
Theoretically,
it's
the first case.
Was it in Texas?
The Dallas hospital is now housing this particular individual who came in from Liberia. And the interesting thing is there's so much misinformation, there's so much speculation, there is this bordering on fear and panic that it's hard to even separate the wheat from the chaff on the Ebola story. And one of the things that's been passing around in inboxes and other stuff is a very interesting article that, to quote Robert Herman, who posted it on a blog on September 27th, the Ebola, Delaware State University professor Dr. Cyril Broderick says Africans do not deserve to be treated like guinea pigs. And Herman goes on to say that Dr. Broderick charges that a secret battle between the U.S. and Soviet spies in the 1970s led to the manufacture of AIDS-like viruses, suggesting a biowarfare aspect to Ebola. And Robert Herman's tone is, this is kind of, another one of these conspiracy buff theories. Right. And of course, he may be right, but we've been hearing for years all kinds of rumors and stuff about AIDS and Ebola, and the question was, why do these particular viruses pop up in places like Central Africa and other parts of Africa, but they don't pop up in places like South America or any other places with indigenous people that have poor sanitation or whatever? It always seems to pop up in Africa. Well, Broderick's charges, one of the parts of them, is that this is all a man-made, genetically modified organism, both the AIDS and the Ebola virus. And the interesting thing about his conspiracy theory article is he goes on to cite a particular book that was written in 1998 by a Dr. Horowitz. Let me see if I can pull
Now, you and I went back and forth on this as we were discussing this earlier today.
Right.
And of course, my first question is,
where is this coming from?
Where's this coming from?
Who is this guy?
Correct. How are they vetting this information?
That's right.
And you took a little bit of time and did some research.
I tried to dig up where it might have been coming from. And indeed, there was a book written in 1998 by Dr. Lester Horowitz, I believe the gentleman's name is. And the title of the book, don't ask me where, it's Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola. And the thrust of that Dr. Leonard Horowitz, right, Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, and the thrust of the book, and according to this particular review, this is the first in-depth exploration into the origins of HIV and Ebola. Claims that these emerging viruses naturally evolved and then jumped species from ape to man seem grossly unfounded in light of the compelling evidence assembled in this extraordinary text.
Okay.
So the bottom line is this guy has taken the evidence, gone back through what had been done. The book reviews the numerous viral vaccine studies conducted simultaneously in New York City and Central West Africa by a narrow network of virologists working for major military medical contractors under the auspices of the National Cancer Institute and the World Health Organization.
And what was that date again?
1998
Right.
is when the book came out, and he's talking about research and viruses and immune system ravaging viruses that were experimented with an assortment of antidote vaccines allegedly for, quote, defense and cancer prevention. This is Dr. Horowitz's theory.
Okay, but obviously not generated, rapidly generated in light of the recent publicity.
No.
This has been a standing piece of research.
1998.
Okay.
And basically he was doing research from what had transpired between 1960 and the 1970s.
And this was off the news,
so
this was under the news radar. So
I slept all this.
Okay.
I don't know when.
Right.
If this other recent Ebola scare hadn't popped up, I would have slept that. And so it's interesting because there's now some kind of dueling information coming out of Africa. The WHO is putting out their count on the cases, and the Sierra Leone government is now putting out their counts. That's right. And they have a Facebook page, and they're headlining things like no more cases in Tekmira, the original site of the laboratory that was actually a U.S. government funded laboratory that the University of Tulane had received funding, and they were doing all this Ebola experimentation. And guess what? That's the core center of the breakout. Okay? And so you start to look at those kinds of pieces of evidence and you say, well, maybe the conspiracy theory may not be so much conspiracy, and something should be looked at maybe with a little bit more skepticism. We haven't had time to really dig into this, but because we look for red flags, one of the red flags that caught my eye was that one of the companies that received funding to do some of this Ebola testing and research, a Canadian pharmaceutical company, as soon as the outbreak hit and they started talking about what they were working on, stock prices in the last couple of days have skyrocketed. Okay? And you know that old adage, but they always tell you, follow the money.
Yes.
When the stock prices start to skyrocket and the people who were doing the testing and got the funding to do the testing and where they were testing is where the outbreak started.
Yes.
Well, we need to be looking at this a lot more carefully, folk, and we need to be not just taking the WHO's account of what's going on. We need to hear what the governments have to say themselves. And yeah, we know that they're, quote, poor and understaffed African countries, but they have some pretty sharp medical people who have been on the ground in the heart of the matter. So I think we should be somewhat skeptical.
Now, we've already had issues even in this country where the Centers for Disease Control mishandled samples that were either supposed to be destroyed or put in absolute secure storage, and we already had issues where some of that was, there's no proof that any of that got into the environment, but the security that
of the laboratory
samples,
policies was very lax.
And you wonder. So there, like you said, there are questions we haven't really investigated ourselves, and we will do that.
What I discovered in digging into some of this was that there was a big brouhaha in the scientific community about the fact that digging up these pathogens and these dormant viruses and these things that they had no cure for and doing new testing on them. There was a big conflict in the scientific community about what the risks were, and there was a prediction that there could be a global pandemic if they started this stuff, and they were poo-pooed, and the scientific community basically split. You shouldn't be doing this unless you've got a way to safeguard the risk factor, and you need to do a risk factor study. And the big fight back and forth was the risk factor study that was done or wasn't done properly or wasn't done at all but claimed to have been done. And so what I'm reading between the lines on just getting into this story is there's a lot going on that journalists should be digging into about this story. And this outbreak, even if it's not a man-made virus that's caused this outbreak, the scientific community's work within that field may have been responsible for this outbreak.
There might have been some compromising in some part of the handling of the samples.
I got to tell you, I think some journalists should be digging into this story in a really serious way, because there's more to this story than meets the eye.
And you know what's going to happen now that we have a case that's here. More money's going to get thrown at it. It's easier and you get more publicity doing it locally, I'm afraid.
The interesting thing, and we need to get off of Ebola so we can get on to our other things, but the interesting thing is the guy, and that's why I'm still skeptical, the guy who's thought to be the preeminent authority on Ebola is a fellow by the name of Peter Piot, and he was the co-discoverer of the Ebola virus in 1976. And he gave an interview to a French magazine recently when this outbreak came up, and the young lady asked him, could you imagine an Ebola outbreak of this size that's going on now? And his answer was, I never thought it would get this big. I always thought it was an accident of history where someone becomes infected from a bat, probably. And then an outbreak is contained. Ebola came and went. I really never thought it could happen, but it shows again when the right or bad conditions are all combined with each other, these things will happen again. Well, the conspiracy theorist guy is saying, bat my eye. And if the preeminent authority says from a bat, probably, what does that tell you? The preeminent authority doesn't know.
Correct.
Red flag.
Yes.
Folk, red flag. When the preeminent authority cannot tell you from all his 38 years of research what the original source and cause of this, we need to be looking at this a lot more carefully, folk. I try not to be Mr. Conspiracy Theorist, but you know and I know there's always more to the story than the first blush. Like the first blush of the CIA, the Secret Service, and the White House invasion. Or we got him right inside the front door. And we're finding out, no, he went down to the left and went down to the East Room, and it wasn't until some guy coming off duty saw him and tackled him. So you get the first explanation, you might have to say, maybe we need to take another look at that. So I think we got about 10 minutes.
Yeah, about 10 minutes.
Or less.
Yes, we have about 9 minutes.
And folks, that's so we can get to what we really want to get to. Another update. The NFL's off the front page on their domestic violence handling and their PR spin. But we know a week and a half ago, the commissioner went down to the domestic violence center, I believe in Texas, to do a PR tour. Well, what can I tell you? I don't think the PR tour went well. I don't know if it helped the image. But as we said before, we were talking about it's not the NFL, it's in the society. We promised our viewers we'd get you the update on the judge. Guess what? He's a federal judge, state of Alabama. He actually got charged with domestic violence for assaulting his wife and kicking her in an Atlanta hotel room. So he's got a lifetime appointment to a federal bench, but now belatedly there are calls for his resignation. Gentleman's name is Mark Fuller, federal judge. So that's our update on that one.
Okay.
We know that there was an attempt PR spin. The Ferguson police cop.
Right.
Chief.
The Ferguson police chief actually went. I guess he tried to extend an olive branch to the family, and with an apology.
Press conference apology
Yes.
of some sort.
Yes.
Yeah. We take that with a grain of salt because the bottom line is the first course that the Ferguson police installed wasn't how to do better community policing. It was how to win the media
Right.
when you do bad things. I said, oh, okay, that's great.
Yes.
Let's win the PR battle. Let's not do better policing. So that apology, I'm sure, I do believe that the young man's mother was not receptive to the police chief's apology.
As you said, it was more of a PR thing
The PR
rather
spin,
than actual improvement in the police protocol.
Speaking of PR spins and sports,
Yes.
ESPN. It's going to be a week and a half, maybe two. Bill Simmons, one of their most popular on-air, multi-platform
Right.
commentators. I don't know what you call somebody who says, I'm not really a journalist, I'm a fan.
Yes.
I mean, those are his words.
Yes,
So we don't know what you call somebody who says that. But they hired him, they used him, and the bottom line is he ran afoul of them. Can you give us a blow-by-blow on how it went down, Bob?
Well, I mean, he first of all, he wrote it was a podcast. It was an audio.
Right. Podcast.
And he just piled on to Commissioner Goodell, Roger Goodell of the NFL.
Right.
And
he basically called Commissioner Goodell a liar.
A liar.
Okay.
And he used a few four-letter terms in the podcast.
Yeah.
And then he challenged. He basically told his bosses, "I dare you to do something about me. If you have a problem with me, to heck with you." And he basically challenged his own bosses to do something about
Right.
it, which of course they did.
That's very interesting that ESPN took a lot of heat for suspending him.
Yes.
And the headlines were, Simmons calls Goodell a liar, gets suspended. We had a conversation about that, didn't we?
Yes.
And see, because we've done this for a long time, we've come to the conclusion, if he had been working for me and I was running ESPN, I care less if he wants to call Goodell a liar when the evidence seems to point to the possibility that Goodell may have been lying.
No.
Where he would have run afoul of me had I been his boss if he says, and I dare you to do anything about me calling this guy a liar just because I feel like daring you. Well,
Yeah.
I would have suspended him.
Yes.
Period.
Yes. That would have been an easy executive
that would have
decision.
been easy. So all these people that are beating up on ESPN because they suspended him, they're missing the real fine point of this story. But because we do this for a living, we understand exactly why he ran afoul.
No, in a journalistic operation like that, you don't do that. That's unprofessional.
Childish,
yes.
But hey, I guess that's how you build a brand when you're a fan. And
That's the
these
problem.
days, it's building a brand. Folks, when I say that, you can tell there's sarcasm in my voice because we come from the old school of journalism. It's not about you. It's about how well you cover the story as accurately as possible.
Right.
But we do need to beat up on ESPN, though.
Yes.
Because in the interest of disclosure, last year, your Stadium Circle Features worked with EVT Educational Productions, and together we put together a town hall meeting for ESPN Radio New York at their request.
Yes.
And they needed to do that town hall meeting because they had leased 98.7 KISS FM's frequency, turned it into a Disney ESPN New York radio frequency.
Right.
And the people were up in arms because they were losing all these black voices and all these public affairs shows and different things that reflected who that community is and was.
Yes.
And so the interesting thing is they brought in the individual who reached out to us turned out to be the vice president and general manager of the new lease station, a gentleman by the name of David Roberts. And David turned out to be an African American,
Yes.
which gratified us to no end. And so we said, okay, we'll help give you a platform to
Yes.
get your message out.
And we staged with the help of a few others that great town hall at Mist up in Harlem.
Missed Harlem. We had a full house
Yes.
for that town hall meeting. And because Bob did great work on online social media, we had some other colleagues who reached out through all these various listservs. We had a packed house. And it was pretty much a very fractious and very heated
Yes.
town hall meeting, but it stayed respectful. And David Roberts showed up with a number of the station colleagues. And it turned out to be a good representation across the board, people of color. They had Stephen A. Smith, they had Bill Daughtry,
Yes.
two on-air, high-profile African-American talent. They had other people of color in their sales and their marketing force. So the community looked at that, listened, they had a great exchange, and it looked like they were off to a good start.
It looks like things were looking good. They had a diversity protocol set up, and we would see some action.
Some nice movement.
Some nice movement down the road.
Some of the things that Dave said, we're going to do more earlier public affairs programming. We're going to make sure we've got Stephen A.
Yes.
in prime time. Bill Daughtry's with us. And it looked like a great start. They were broadcasting live at the annual Harlem Week.
Yes.
And it was a great beginning.
But with 2 minutes left, what happened? Go ahead.
It's now 12 plus months later. Dave Roberts gets promoted upstairs, and all that diversity disappears.
All
Stephen
that-
A. is no longer there. One of the sales rep that we know that was
Yes.
there, we found him over at WBGO,
Yes.
and he disappeared. I guess he didn't spell it out, but we could read between the lines. Dave Roberts was no longer running the station. He felt more comfortable at WBGO than at
Yes.
ESPN New York Radio. Well, they just put out a press release. It's going to be a week and a half, almost 2 weeks when this airs, and they announced their new lineup. And their new lineup, you give the folks the news.
The new lineup is basically all white males. Exactly the opposite of what we would have expected coming out of that town hall meeting. They're extending Mike Lupica's show by an hour, and they're doing some other tweaks. And they gave us a little bit of a bone. They said Bill Daughtry would do some 60 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
the 1 minute updates.
yeah,
The 1 minute
up-
updates,
and-
Monday through Friday.
Right, and so nothing. So we're very disappointed, and that's not going to be the last you hear from us
Yeah,
on this
folks.
matter with 30 seconds
Yeah,
left.
we need to make this go. Our disapproval needs to go viral, and whatever you could write to Bob Iger, Robert Iger, the president of DEO, the CEO of Disney out in California. But anyway, we will be revisiting this, and you'll see more of it online.
Okay, well, I'm Bob Anthony.
I'm Eric Tait. This has been Media Watch, brought to you by EBT Educational Productions and MNN. We'll catch you the next time.